and they can use facial recognition technology to kind of base their decision. And again, this information is fed into a program based on your responses, that whether or not you are a good candidate or likely to be a good candidate to hire. Again, this can be another form of AI bias in the hiring process, because the computer only knows what it is fed. The people's voice. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the people's voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the people's voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we thank everyone who is taking the time to listen to the podcast today and check out the video. We understand that you can be doing something else with your time today, so I appreciate you taking some time to listen to the podcast. As always, if this information is valuable, please feel free to share it. You can subscribe to the podcast, and you will be notified for each episode that is dropped. And each episode comes out on Fridays. We also have a YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to that at Trey Evans is the YouTube channel. And we put out the video every Friday at 3 p.m. for those of you who want to watch the podcast. So thank you again, and we appreciate your support. So today I want to get into AI. AI has been a very hot topic lately. Typically, I don't do hot topics. It even bothers me a little bit to use the phrase hot topics, but it's been a hot topic. And so I'm covering it today because I'm covering it from a different perspective, because a lot of the conversation around AI is, at least recently, from what I've seen, has been around music and the ability to mimic other artists, and who do we know is going to be actual, and it's just going to be computer generated, and we can make music and make the music sound like this singer and that singer. And that's been a lot of the conversation. But today I want to talk about AI in the hiring process. And there's been a few pieces here and there that I've seen when I was doing the research on this, but I don't think it's getting enough exposure. And so, as you guys know who listen to the podcast, and if it's your first time, I typically like to talk about topics that are not getting enough exposure, at least in my opinion. So this is kind of my way to bring those type of topics to the forefront. So AI in hiring, because in today's world, a lot of companies are utilizing AI for their hiring practices. And this is, in terms of job screening, interviewing, and eventually if you are offered or if you're given an offer. So I want to talk about that today. AI in the hiring process. But I guess before I even talk about AI, we have to, first explain what is AI, right? Because the term has been thrown around so much that, you might not even have a, strong understanding of what AI is. So let me give that definition first, and then we will go from there. So I got this definition from, where did I get? I went to a couple because I wanted to get a simplified version of what AI is, right? Because you can get into the technical jargon and you can get lost of what it actually is. But basically, in a nutshell, AI is the ability for a computer to think and learn like a human, right? Excuse me, let me first define it. AI means artificial intelligence. Let me start there. And basically, artificial intelligence is basically training computers, computer software programs to think and learn and respond like a human, right? So that's what AI is. That's what artificial intelligence is. And that's just, again, that is just a very concentrated definition of it. I mean, there's a more expansive definition of it, but for this conversation, that's what we need to know, right? Basically training computers and computer software to think and learn and interact like humans. So, okay, artificial intelligence is out here. Okay, why is this a concern? Well, touching back on this definition, right? When you have something that is being trained to think and learn like human beings, this raises the chances of bias creeping into it, right? Because if I have a computer or a computer program and I say to the computer program, I want you to think like I think, and I want you to feel how I feel. I want you to have the same type of emotions and reactions to some of the things that I love and I hate. And then I use that computer and say, hey, I want to meet somebody similar to how I think and feel. And I invite people to utilize my computer or my computer program or video technology, and they don't match up to how I think or feel. That is a form of, bias in business, specifically when you're talking about the hiring process. So that's why it's a major concern. And there's been, like I said, there's been some conversations about that, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about what AI bias in the hiring process looks like, kind of, what has been some of the conversations that have been discussed, and what can be done to eliminate, or at least not eliminate it, because you're not going to eliminate it, but what can be done to modify it and control it so it does not create additional bias in the hiring process, right? Because we already know there's been millions and millions of cases, well, thousands of cases, I don't want to say millions, but of discrimination of some form or fashion from race, religion, or gender. So anyway, AI bias. Okay, let me first go into some of the conversations around AI bias. So AI bias, as I said, well, let me get this definition so we can both all be clear about this. I'm reading an article here from Tech Target. They did a great job on AI hiring bias, and they really broke down what it is, who's affected, and what it looks like. So I'm going to read directly here from the article. It says AI bias denotes any way that AI and data analytic tools can be perpetrated or amplify bias. This can take on many forms, the most common being increased ratio of a particular sex, religion, or sexual orientation. Another form may be differences in hiring offers that increase disparities of income for different groups. And then it kind of goes on to say what are some of the common forms of AI bias. But, what AI bias is, basically, again, it can take on many different forms, as it says here in this article. But specifically, it can definitely weed out potential candidates based on religion, sexual orientation, or gender, and sex as well. So examples of this happening. Now, I was reading an article here from 2018. So back in 2018, Amazon was utilizing a AI hiring process where they utilized AI technology to screen potential candidates for positions that they were filling. Now, Amazon eventually got rid of that particular hiring program because it did not work. And so I'm reading an article here from Reuters, and they did an article back in 2018 where they talked about Amazon scrapping their AI recruitment tool. And one of the issues with that specific recruitment tool is that it constantly would identify potential candidates, or I should say, it would screen out potential candidates based on their gender. So if the program would screen 100 resumes, it would only spit out a certain number of resumes, and generally those resumes were based on men, or I should say the resumes that were screened out were women, and then the resumes or candidates that moved forward were based on men, because basically the program was trained through its information that was fed to it based on the current candidates that they had at Amazon, and in particular positions that men were the preferred candidates for these positions. Well, that's where you have AI bias come in, right? Because now you were screening a whole population of people out of these jobs, right? Specifically women, based on gender. So that's a form of gender bias. And the discrimination would be, a lot of times it could be just something in your resume that indicated that you were a woman, that you played on in college, you played on the women's volleyball team. You might have had that on your resume. You might have said that you're part of a women's networking group. Any little thing that said women in there or woman, it would screen out potential candidates and only accept those that either didn't have those descriptions in there, didn't have some form of language, or maybe even a name that indicated that you may be a woman. And then those that didn't have that in there, they would be accepted as potential candidates and suggested as the stronger of the candidates for these jobs. So that's just one example of AI bias. Now, again, Amazon did eventually move on from that hiring, that AI process, or that AI hiring process software, because they did realize that it was truly being discriminatory towards the potential candidates. So that's just one example of what AI bias looks like. Another example of AI bias can come in the form of actual screening. So now a lot of companies, many companies use video hiring process where they take facial recognition during the interview, right? You may have a video interview, and especially these days, most of the interviews are, remote based, or many are remote based. So you might be talking to a recruiter who may be in another state or, another city from where you're at, and they can use facial recognition technology to kind of base their decision. And again, this information is fed into a program based on your responses, that whether or not you are a good candidate or likely to be a good candidate to hire. Again, this can be another form of AI bias in the hiring process, because the computer only knows what it is fed, right? It's not, it's, and I'm trying not to get too technical, but the program takes information from either information that has been programmed into it, or by gathering a history of potential candidates that it's screened over the months and the years. Well, if in the beginning, right, you go through the AI process for your resume, and it's the AI process is only screening, let's say, men, right? I'm just going to keep it gender based. And now you have a woman who maybe passed the screening process from the resume standpoint, but now is having a video interview, and they have the video recognition, video face recognition software during the video. It might screen her out because the AI program might say, well, based on her facial inflections, it doesn't sync to what we know are candidates that we've hired before. And again, you're relying a lot on this computer software program computer to make these decisions. So that's another case of AI bias when it creeps in. It creeps in during the interview process, especially for companies who are using facial recognition technology during the interview process. So that's just another example of it. And this is widespread. So, there is a ton of companies who utilize this now, especially since the pandemic with remote working, increasing, and you have candidates that are being pulled from all parts of the country. You now have companies who, obviously are not going to fly a recruiter out to a specific site. They're utilizing this technology because they feel, and this is from the articles that I've read, they feel that this helps to reduce the number of hours that have to be worked by recruiters and HR folk to make decisions on who could be a potential candidate to hire, to interview, and then eventually hire. So again, another case of AI bias. One more example of AI bias, and this was interesting when I read this, was AI bias can then creep up in the job offer that you get, right? Because let's say you get past the screening process for the resume, you get past the artificial intelligence or the AI facial recognition part of the interview. And now they say, you know what, you've done great, we want to give you an offer. The AI program can then use previous algorithms based on the location that you've come from or the company that you've previously worked for or the position that you held, and can then come up with a target compensation that they will offer you. Right now, you may be looking for an employment opportunity to increase your salary, right? You may say, I'm leaving this company because I want to go work over here to make, potentially X amount of more dollars, but that may limit you from what you can actually negotiate, because the AI algorithm will say, well, this person comes from, this city, has worked at these 3 previous jobs. The average salary at these three previous jobs is this. So we're going to offer that person this. And this is all done through programs, through AI programs. So again, that could be another form of income bias, right? Or AI bias, but definitely income bias, because you could be limited to your earning potential based on what this computer or software program, this AI program, says ultimately you should be offered. So those are just 3 examples of AI bias in the hiring process. And again, this is being adapted more and more because companies are looking for more streamlined ways to identify candidates, to interview candidates, and then also offer, eventually put forward an offer to hire a candidate. Now, this has been addressed, and a lot of states are definitely moving towards laws that are limiting or at least holding these companies accountable that utilize these softwares and these programs to screen candidates. There is right now in New Jersey, a new bill is on the way, or at least is being discussed. And Daniel Nielsen, who's with the ACLU of New Jersey, talked about this on a story with PBS. He was interviewed about this, and he kind of explained as well what AI bias does and what can be done to kind of curb it. So let's take a listen.
If you accept that there is bias, which there is in our existing labor pool and who works at different companies, whether it be people of certain races, people who went to the right schools, people who have the right hobbies and fit in with the existing workforce, if you're just trying to replicate that workforce and say that's who's qualified for this job, then that becomes replicated in that hiring tool.
And that's what I just, kind of said earlier, right? You get replication of bias if an organization is already biased towards women or towards people of color or towards certain religions. Well, they're going to create a program that's going to find similar people to support their beliefs or the type of air quotes individuals that they feel are the right candidates in their position. But Daniel Nielsen was talking about this again. He's with the ACLU because New Jersey currently has a bill that is being in the process of being voted on to make companies accountable. Now, New York City has already passed a bill. Matter of fact, the bill goes into effect. It went into effect this year, where companies, before they can utilize AI technology in their hiring process, the software has to go through a audit, and the audit has to confirm that there are no bias tendencies within the programming. Now, this, of course, takes a ton of money, and enforcement of it is going to be difficult. But here's the thing. If a individual is screened, interviewed, and hired or not hired, there has to be notification that their decision not to hire you was based on AI technology. So that's the key thing about this bill, that you have to have notification that, hey, unfortunately, we didn't give you the position. And one of the reasons why is that we utilized AI technology to kind of make the decision in the hiring process. But New York has already taken the first step to, sign a bill that will try to at least get in front of the bias, get in front of AI bias or AI hiring bias by auditing these programs to ensure that there are just checking for skill sets and not just using preferential treatment or preferences in terms of gender, race, religion, or sex orientation to make decisions about who they will and won't hire. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today. I thought, this was an important conversation to have, and then of course, in terms of solutions, there are a few solutions that, just like I talked about the bill as being that's already in effect in New York. New Jersey is also working through a bill, and there's several other states that now have bills in the process to address this in terms of AI hiring bias. Some other things, some other suggestions I'm reading here from this Tech Target article. It says keep humans in the loop. Obviously, there has to be some type of human connection. Even though these computers are to be streamlined and cut down on costs for human resources and recruiting, you still need to have a human element make the ultimate decision. These tools should be used as an addition, should not be used specifically just to make the final decision. Obviously, leaving out bias elements, you have to, and a lot of these companies, again, they have to audit these systems as well, and these programs, right? So their IT folks should be going in to kind of see what the history is and making the necessarily modifications if they find that there's bias, a bias history within the program. There has to be an emphasis on protected groups. Designers of these programs and hiring departments have to ensure that these programs are not biased towards protected groups. Protected groups would be based on gender, race, religion, things of that nature. And then, of course, quantify success. Over time, they have to evaluate, again, how these systems are working. And if they see a trend, it must be addressed. And then they need to revamp those systems or those programs in computers to ensure that AI bias is not within them. So those are just some few things that if you are an HR recruiter who works for one of these companies, or even smaller companies are using it now too. It's not just large companies. So if you're a business owner, make sure that if you're utilizing this technology, that you're taking the necessary steps to ensure that you're getting a real world view of all potential candidates and not just a slim view based on any bias that the software may have inherited or may have been programmed into it. So, that's my time for today. I know it's a lot of information. Again, I just wanted to bring this to the forefront. I thought it was a great topic as I was researching last week on some other things. I came across this, so I wanted to talk about it today. So as always, if this information has been helpful and enlightening, and you want to leave a comment, you can reach me on my social platforms. You can reach me at I am Trey Evans on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You could also reach us at the show podcast, which is the show podcast Instagram, which is the People's Voice Podcast, the People's Voice Podcast. And you could also reach me on LinkedIn at Trey Evans. But again, I hope this information was enlightening, and please feel free to share it. We appreciate it. So as always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute. People's Voice.